Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel for the next part of my look at Jutland, Avalon Hill's 1967 classic. So in the last video I touched very briefly on how the strategic movement and search maps work, and so now I'm going to head into the other half of this great game, which is the tactical combat and how that works. Now, this may be spread over a couple of videos because the tactical combat can be a bit multi-layered, and this is a direct product of the game helpfully offering you a basic combat system, an advanced combat system, and additional optional rules under the tournament system. So what I'm going to do is set up a very small engagement between elements of the two fleets, just so we can have a look at the basics. So let us say, for example, and I'm going to return to the strategic map here, that a German fleet has reached a position in the middle of the North Sea and is moving from that hex into that hex. Now, unbeknown to the German player, the British one on his map is recording his ships approaching from not quite an opposite direction, but nearly so. You know, not. It's definitely not a head-on collision, but they will meet. So the British player on his sheet is busily marking that movement. The German player during the search phase calls out that hex number, and the British player responds that they have made that he does have ships in the hex and they have therefore made contact. So what happens at this point is that both players have to set up the battlefield in accordance with the placement diagram. Now, I am going to play a little bit fast and loose with this because, as you can see, that little rectangle there represents the battle area marker, which you place in the center of your battlefield just to mark out. It gives you a measuring point from which to set up its boundaries. But we are looking at 18,000 yards by the range ruler from the center of the battle area marker all the way out to the edge of the board. So really, ideally, you want each hex, when you express it in battle map or battle area terms, to be on the safe side. I'd say you probably want a 4 foot by 4 foot space. Now, we're dealing with my dining table here, which is anything but. And as you can see, my homemade ranging marker only goes up to 23,000 yards. So measuring off 18 from that, I know I'm off camera, but if you could see off that way, actually, tell you what, I'll give you guys a look. We are already drifting off the edge of my table. So like I say, because I can't find a practical way of doing this without my cat eating half the fleet, I am just going to play fast and loose with the dimensions, and we're just going to pretend that I have measured off the distances properly. So I'll just see if I can get a good angle on this. So having hypothetically and in very ramshackle fashion established the center of my battlefield, you can then measure off to the areas where the opposing fleets are coming in. Now, as you recall, the German ships were moving in from that direction, and the British ships were coming in from that direction, so they would set up there accordingly. Now, I've used the rather grandiose terms fleet, but for the purposes of this demonstration, I've decided to somewhat cruelly pit HMS Colossus and HMS Neptune, sort of, mid-level British dreadnoughts, against the cream of the German crop in the form of Markgraf and Kronprinz Wilhelm. Now, I am being very mean here because, leaving Baden and Bayern aside, in 1916, these were the most modern of the German dreadnoughts. Whereas, as I say, the British ones were a tiny bit intermediate at this stage. So just looking at their stats, I mean, Colossus does have a stronger bow firing arc than Kronprinz Wilhelm, and same astern. but the German ship's broadside has a whopping factor of 6 to the British ship's 4. Now, in the basic game, this will be a bit problematic for the British, as we'll see in a bit. The only other things you need to be aware of in terms of the geography of these ships is the numbers in the bottom right-hand corner here. So the 7 is the armour rating. Again, the Germans come out significantly better than the British. And the 8 is their speed, so they break even there. So setting them up, and again, I apologize for the compression. We're going to say that the German ship Kronprinz Wilhelm is the flagship. And you set them up just off map with their bases in contact. I'm just going to place them there, however, because then you'll be able to see them. And I will similarly place the British ships with Colossus as the squadron flagship coming in on the correct bearing. Let me just make sure I actually am on the correct bearing. Yay, I am! Miraculous. And then once the opposing fleets are placed, you can take that away, just so the obstruction is removed. Now, in the basic combat system, things are very straightforward. The German player always moves first, followed by the British player. Now, this has its pros and its cons. As the German player, you can stake your bit of ocean out first, but the downside is that the British can react to your movements at will. So that is one thing to bear in mind when you're playing the basic combat system. And generally speaking, as far as movement goes, nothing changes across the different levels of rules hierarchy. Manoeuvring works the same way in all of them. Now, although the game is not prescriptive about this, as I'd mentioned in the previous video, they strongly recommend that for the purposes of command and control, you employ the historical manoeuvring formations that were used at the time. And it is a great way of concentrating your firepower. The sweet spot when you have a large unwieldy force, as I've found, is anything between 6 to 8 ships. Make ideal homogeneous units, but even then you do sweat sometimes when you've got slight speed differentials and you're trying to do something like that. And of course, it's always a bit tricky for the Germans because this chart makes the battle turn away look easy, but in reality, it's not that easy to pull off. As you can see, using the maneuver gauge, ships should, in theory, behave themselves. But if you're caught mid-turn, you do end up with some very interesting kinks in your formation. And I have found in some games that when you've got when you have got ships of different speeds and capabilities trying to do a front to flank, it does get very hairy indeed. But anyway, as we've got very small forces here with the squadrons comprised of only 2 ships each, I don't think it will be a massive problem. So the Germans are going to make their move first. And again, I've got my Heath Robinson manoeuvring gauge. So with a speed of 8, the Germans are going to be a bit unsubtle with this one. They're just going to steam straight in and attempt, if my camera will focus, excellent, to cross the British T. So butting that up against Kronprinz Wilhelm's bow, we're going to move 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So not bad. They were close. They nearly made it. And I'm just going to, in the interest of speed, I'm going to just going to bring her companion right up there. So good opening move on the Germans' part. However, they've telegraphed their intentions very clearly to the British, who are not going to have this. So they are going to close the distance, of course, but they also want to execute a turn. So they're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then they're going to begin turning. 5, and then 6, 7, 8. So that's not a bad manoeuvre. They've opened their A arcs and they've actually begun to cross the Germans' T in turn. Now I'll have to do this separately for the other British ship, because whenever you introduce a turn, it's a bit of a complicating factor and they may not necessarily line up like you hoped. So 1, 2, 3, slipping already, 4, 5, 6, 7, and they will slow down a bit just to avoid ramming their sister, but effectively they've managed to close up nicely. So there we go. That's the situation at the end of the movement round. Now we move on to gunfire. The Germans again make their dice rolls first, but gunfire in this game is considered simultaneous. So even if the British ship or either of the British ships is fatally hit and sunk, it still manages to get its shot back. And as they're a little bit closer now, I'm just going to give you a better view because there's a lot of featureless ocean going on here. Let's see if that will focus. Will you focus? Please focus. Hurrah! I think we have focus. Yay. So in the basic game, combat is very straightforward, except when it comes to finding my template. Here we are. So that is the basic game gunnery table. It's a very simple odds calculation based on the broadside factor only. Now, if you recall earlier, I'd compared the bow and stern firing arcs of the contending ships. In the basic game, the bow and stern arcs are completely irrelevant. All you have to worry about is the broadside gunnery factor. And even if you're firing out of your bow and stern, you still use the broadside factor in the basic game. The only other rule that applies in terms of gunnery modifiers is that any shot made under 10,000 yards or less doubles your gunnery factor. So this is going to be a bit of a knife fight, this one, because of my compressed battlefield. The only other rule to be aware of is in a nighttime battle, and this is one the British desperately want to avoid, British gunnery factors are halved, rounding any fractions up. So how does shooting work? It's simply a matter of declaring your target, adding up your factors and calculating the odds, your gun power versus the target's protection rating, and rolling the dice. You can either target enemy vessels individually, ship for ship, engage the corresponding vessel in the line, or you can gang up. As long as everybody's within range, it's permissible to do this. So the Germans, because they've got fairly powerful broadsides, they've decided they're going to engage the corresponding ship. So Kronprinz Wilhelm is going to shoot at Colossus, and Markgraf is going to shoot at Neptune. So let's just check the range, which is always measured from the center of the ship's counter to the center of the counter. Yeah, the Germans are well within 10,000 yards for both ships. So let's see what happens. Kronprinz Wilhelm opens fire first and gets a 5. Now her broadside strength against Colossus' armor strength is 6-4. Now these are always rounded in favor of the defender, so it's 1-1. Now luckily for the Colossus, with a roll of 5, that's very much in the no effect box, so the British breathe a huge sigh of relief. I've just realized I've made a terrible mistake. Let's rewind that. What did I forget, everybody? What did I forget? It was the range, wasn't it? Rewind. So the German range takers do their job properly this time. They're within 10,000 yards. Their gunnery factor is actually 12. So that's actually 3-1 odds in the Germans' favour. So it was that column. Luckily for the British, a 5 did nothing anyway. Phew, big sigh of relief. What about Markgraf? We're looking at the same sort of odds as she targets Neptune. So she blazes away and she gets a 1. Oh no. That's rather bad news for the British. That is a sunk result. Okay. So we'll remember that Neptune has been fatally hit and sinking. Yes, ships do die quickly in the basic game. What about the British? Because the turn now passes to them. Now, because of the short range, they're feeling a bit confident about this one. Had the range been beyond 10,000 yards, I would have been tempted to order both ships to gang up on the leading German vessel. But we're going to try our luck. It's still going to be a bit tough, though, because even with gunnery factors doubled to 8, the German armour rating of 7 means we're effectively firing at them at a 1-1. So I could live to regret this. I'm going to make their roll together. We'll do the red dice for Colossus and the blue dice for Neptune and see how we do. Come on, boys. Amazing. The British exact a measure of revenge because with that result of 1, oh, hang on, did I, yes, one of the German ships is indeed sunk. So the British lose Neptune at the end of that round and the Germans lose Markgraf. So that is a fairly bloody round of combat for both sides. So with that completed, we go back to manoeuvring again. Now, there isn't really all that much reason for the Germans to get any closer because they're well within the 10,000 yard range for their armament being doubled. The question is, what are the Brits going to do? If they're going to make a fight of it, it's highly unlikely that they're going to do any exceptionally radical manoeuvring. And because this is the basic game, there's really no need for the Germans to turn away. Although equally, they don't really want to risk a collision. So what they're going to do... ramming is not a thing in this game, so the Germans are feeling a bit confident about just holding their course. So they're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And the British, who really are not going to back down because it's World War I and, you know, they've got an awful lot of Nelsonic mental baggage they've got to deal with. They're going to hold their course and go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, if we were playing the more advanced rules, gunnery factors would be tripled by now. But as we are not, we're still in the basic game. We're just going to see whether any decisive result is scored. I'm going to save a bit of time. I'm going to assign the... well, I'm first of all going to sort my camera out. Are we there? Yay! I'm going to assign the red dice to... Kronprinz Wilhelm and the blue dice to Colossus. Both of them are firing at the same odds as before. So actually the Germans have a bit of an advantage because they sink the British ship on a 1 or 2. The Brits sink them on a 1. And it appears we have a round of ineffective gunfire. So much to the relief of both crews, despite the incredibly close range they were fighting at there, they have actually managed to survive another round of intense gunnery. And so the turn will carry, the round of combat will carry on until we get to the 6th round of combat. Once that ends, that equates to 1 full hour of game time. And the combat will then be suspended while further movement is conducted on the strategic map. Now, what this does is it brings in the possibility of reinforcements arriving. Because if I return to the map and the point at which this hypothetical encounter happened, let's say there were forces in the surrounding area. Once the shooting starts, they'll of course be making tracks to reinforce the action. So every 6 rounds, the likelihood of someone else pitching in goes up. And so when you fought your 6 rounds, the idea is you leave any unfinished battles undisturbed and go back to the strategic map in order to conduct another round of movement. When you've done your extra round of movement on the strategic map, you can then go back to finishing your battle. And that is how the game copes with the passage of time in the tactical phase. So I'm going to wrap this one up here. I hope that made sense. We're not finished with this sort of example just yet, because in the next video, I want to put you through how the more advanced gunnery features work and how the modelling of both shooting and damage is quite radically different. And I think it is a change for the better. So this basic system is nice. It lets you fight huge battles with a very quick combat resolution system. And while it is bloody in that, as we've seen, 50% of the ships involved in this engagement are sunk already, it's not excessively gory. You know, you do have to concentrate a lot of combat power just to get a 50-50 chance of sinking someone. So I hope that's been of use. As always, do feel free to comment, ask questions, and more than likely, if I've slipped up on something, please do point it out. I'd be very, very grateful indeed. But thank you so much for watching this video, and I look forward to seeing you guys in the next one, where we will be exploring combat, advanced combat that is, in much more detail. Thank you very much, and see you all again soon. Bye.